Hello, everybody, and welcome back to VNext. One thing that we've learned from this pandemic is nothing is certain, and big changes await ahead. With each of these challenges, there is innovation that is still waiting to be solved. Now, the retail industry is no different than any other industry. And so today, we've got a two-part series. In this episode, we've got Brian Peterson. He's a global retail digital strategist, and he talks to the largest retailers around the globe about their challenges, but also how to help them along their transformation journey. So today, we're going to be talking about how Brian sees the future in retail, why data is just so darn important, and how digital ecosystems is changing the face of retail. Now, like with all of our episodes, all of the show notes and links will be available on vnextpod.com. That's vnextpod.com. And with that, let's jump into it. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
I am doing great. How are you faring here right now? We're in a winter wonderland, and this will probably air in the next few weeks. But all over the U.S., it's been major snow. How about where you're at? What's the weather like there?
I'm Canadian, Mike, so it's always snowing here. So same thing as most of the U.S. right now. No, it's nice. It's like a winter wonderland. So we're doing good. I mean, if it wasn't for COVID, we might be someplace warmer. But given that we're a little bit locked down, we're enjoying the winter as much as we can. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. Hunkering down between the winter and the COVID lockdowns. We're just staying inside, staying warm.
Same thing.
So I was excited about having this conversation because this will be one of the first podcasts that we have where we've brought together the intersection in a meaningful way, at least, of a particular industry. In this case, the retail industry. And so, you're an industry expert and strategist around the retail space, CPG space, and I wanted to get your perspectives on how you think about the world and how should people think about industries differently today versus how maybe they previously have thought about it. So before we get into all that, maybe let's start with a little bit about you, Brian. Who you are, your role, all that good stuff.
Great. Yeah, I'm excited about the conversation too. So hopefully this is interesting for both you and for the audience. So my background, I'm a global advisor with Microsoft. So we're a small team that typically works with Microsoft's marquee clients globally, and typically we're working in the innovation space. So trying to work to see where new value can be created, where there's some sort of new opportunities that kind of bring the future of Microsoft together with the future of the clients that we're working with. So as you noted before, I focus a lot of my time in retail CPG, but work with some of the leading brands and CPG customers globally to really think about the future of their businesses.
Nice. And I noticed you've got a post-it party behind you.
Don't we all who work in
Yes.
innovation? Yeah.
If you're going to be any sort of innovator, you've got to have post-its at the ready.
Oh my God. Post-its and Sharpies
Right.
everywhere.
So when you talk about your role and kind of what does that mean when you go out and you talk with customers? Are you pushing Microsoft products? Is this more of kind of a solution architecture type of role, or is this broader than that? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's a little broader than that. Like I think what we don't typically do is go into a client's site and talk about existing technology or existing architecture. We know sort of the basis of where a client's coming from, but really sort of where the magic happens is understanding, where Microsoft is and where the client is, and then understanding where Microsoft is going and starting to seed some of the technology strategies or some of the concepts that both engineering is working on, but also that we're thinking through, because there's obviously a synergy there that happens. And we're really talking about the future businesses of our clients. Yeah, so we're not talking about existing technologies or existing strategy. We're just really trying to find the intersection of where new technology developments are going, and where our clients sort of opportunities are. And so, like, a good day looks like finding a new area to explore with a client that brings to bear not just Microsoft technology, but also sort of technology that exists in the ecosystem to solve problems that really do matter for our clients. So that's generally speaking what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a very, very much of a business-led technology role, is
Yeah.
what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you have to know about, you have to know the technology. You have to know sort of what our capabilities are. But really, if we're helping engineering really start to define the future of what some of the programs are that they're working on, then that looks really good for us, and also allows our clients to really be at the forefront of where Microsoft is going from a technology perspective.
Now, do you think that's naturally where most roles are going to evolve towards anyway? I mean, my personal opinion is I think, the lines that we've created between, technologists and business unit leaders, that, these paradigms are blurring together in a meaningful way as things become more and more digital. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a good observation. I think future roles in technology will be consultative, right? Like, I think the days are gone where there's just a simple technology solution that is being sold into a client site to solve a very specific problem. I think the problems that our clients are facing are more ambiguous in nature. And so I think the solutions to those problems need to come from really consultative relationships with the client. So I can absolutely see sort of technology roles really kind of starting to reflect what we're doing. I think the nice thing that we have is the opportunity to really push the boundaries, and to really be thinking differently about certain issues and certain opportunities. So I'm not sure if that's going to be sort of open more generally to technologists. But I definitely think that the nature of the role is, as you said, I think very much more consultative in nature.
Yeah, and as a bit of a personal story as contextualization here as well. Earlier in my career, I was fortunate enough to work for a company where essentially, the IT organization and the business units, we had more of what was referred to back then as business unit IT, or BUIT. And it was in the financial services space, that was a more common model, and still is. But what was interesting about that was, if we did a town hall and all hands with our IT leadership, our CIO, one of the first things that he would say would be announcing the stock price and where it's at, how it's been trending, the health of the business. And what that did is it got the IT folks vested in where the business was going. And instead of saying they are the business, it was putting down the moniker, we are the business. And you could be the janitor, you could be the developer, the DBA, the whoever. It doesn't matter. You're still employed by this company, and you're vested in making sure that it's successful. And, I always looked up to that particular CIO for really driving those principles forward, because it made everyone think, as we were making decisions on what to do and what not to do, what vendors to pick, etc. It really, gauged, where we were going to go. And we at least thought twice about going down a particular path, because we're like, oh, well, what would that do to the stock? What would the shareholders say about this?
Yeah.
So it's a long-winded way of saying I agree with you.
Yeah, and to know that what you do in your in your day to day actually really can affect sort of the performance of the company, right? I think that's what we're seeing as well right now. I think you're seeing sort of especially in the technology space, you know, a direct correlation between individuals and teams and their ability to create new value, and then the obviously the valuation of the company, or the value of the company. So I feel like now more than ever, there's that direct correlation. So the more that individuals within an organization understand that they have direct impact and they understand the fundamentals of the business, the better.
Yeah. And so speaking of kind of past and and where we're at right now, it would be good to also understand your journey on how you got here and why did you choose this type of role? Because, from what I know of your role, and I'm cheating a little bit because I work for the same company and a sister team, is that this is a very senior position within the company. You're talking to extremely senior people within these, Fortune 100 companies around the globe. And, it's not an easy job and it's a very specific skill set. So maybe tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got here, and really, why this versus something else.
Yeah, great. Early days of my career started in startups. So I'm born and raised in the West Coast in Vancouver. So started my career in startups, which I think it was just a fascinating place to start sort of a technology career. It was during the .com, so really understood how organizations attempted to create new value, right, and landed within a market. And I was part of a startup that didn't make it over the .com sort of hurdle, but even in that in itself was such a fascinating experience. And so I think my early career just really fell in love with sort of the entrepreneurialism that is possible within the technology space. And so, like, a lot of my career has been sort of in and around technology. So started there, moved out to Montreal, where I started working with a scale up called Discrete Logic. In my previous career, I was working in telecommunications. In this phase of my career, started working in visual effects, in feature film and post production. So we did Discrete did a lot of very, very high end visual effects software for TV and film. And so, really, again, worked within the technical realms within that organization. So technical product management, really owning product lines for that organization. We were acquired by Autodesk, which was also an interesting process to go through, and became the media entertainment division of that company. And from there, kind of moved out of technology development and into sales, and built out part of Canada and the US for the media entertainment division of Autodesk. So really got to experience what it was like to sell and represent the products that I had developed, or been responsible for within the engineering teams there. And just again, really, really loved sort of the entrepreneurialism that existed within technology. So I became fascinated with this idea of creating new value, and creating new products and services. So did an MBA where I focused on innovation strategy. And at the time, didn't really want to leave technology, but had this really interesting opportunity come up for me, which was to go back to the West Coast and work with Lululemon. So an apparel company that I think was doing some really interesting, and still is doing some really interesting work in the innovation space. So I came in and helped build an innovation team there called Whitespace. And we really did a lot of great work, not just in the apparel side of the business, but also thinking about new concepts for the company. So really sort of thinking about how is it that an organization that is so good at creating value, how can they be thinking about value creation differently? How can they start to explore different different strategies that wouldn't necessarily be aligned to the core fundamental business of Lululemon. And that was sort of 5 years of just really creative, interesting work, working with very interesting people, putting some things into the world that I think were quite forward thinking. And from there, as I said before, like I didn't really ever want to leave technology, but Lululemon created a great opportunity for me to explore sort of innovation strategy more sort of more specifically. And so with that, I decided that I would kind of step away from apparel and go into consulting. And so I started up with the innovation consulting arm of Deloitte here in Canada called Dublin, and co-led part of that practice in and around innovation capabilities development and design, which again was a really interesting time because I was able to take a lot of what I'd learned from technology development and innovation strategy and bring it to a bunch of different organizations from multiple different industries. And then from there, I was able to join Microsoft in this current role. And so for me, the journey has been very, very consistent, although it doesn't look that way. It's always been around, creating new value. It's been around sort of being an intrapreneur, if you will, within an organization. It's been around developing new concepts and bringing them to life in market. And that's exactly what I'm doing here at Microsoft. So everything's kind of come to bear on what we're doing here with this team, and it's been a great journey.
That is awesome. And, it's a very diverse background, right? Lots of different industries, different sizes of companies.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure that, you've learned a ton based on that experience. And so, I guess with all of that, and, if you could reflect back and kind of, what would be, one or two of more of what you're known for? So if someone says Brian Peterson is, X, what do you think that you're most known for?
Oh my God, that's a hard question to answer, actually. Look, I think besides being charming,
Right.
and right, all that. So I think like professionally, um, I think there's definitely a strand of being able to sort of navigate ambiguity, I think, within an organization and actually start to identify where there could be pockets of value that could be created that are net new to the organization. So I think this idea of seeing white space where maybe others don't, I think is sort of is definitely something that I've been able to kind of do consistently over time. I think the ability to actually bring opportunities to life within pretty complex organizations, Microsoft, Deloitte, Autodesk, those have been challenging environments to do innovation work within. But I've been fairly successful doing that. So I think being able to bring concepts to market and see them sort of grow, I think is something that I think people would recognize about me. And then I think on the third part, probably just sort of leadership and development qualities, right? I'm a huge believer in development, personal development, and development work. I think my time at Lululemon was a really fascinating time in the development space because that organization has just been optimized to create sort of really great leaders, I think, in the world. And so really honed a passion for that. So I think, leadership development, being a fairly effective team leader is something that I think I'd be known for as well. So I think the idea of sort of navigating ambiguity, bringing things to life that are sort of new to world, and then I think leading teams through that process, I think would be sort of the three things that people who know me would recognize.
Right.
That's a good question.
Besides being charming, so it's
Yeah.
good. It's good to have those backup skills,
And having
right?
a great, I think your beer is a little better than mine, but a good beard's not bad as well.
Beards are a plus, right? Being in the beer club,
Exactly.
beard. Well, beer and beard, both are great. So we're talking about industry today, and
Yeah.
we wanted to talk a bit more about the retail industry. And what I think is fascinating about the retail industry is, at least from the surface, you can quickly see what's happening because as all of us as consumers, we can see a lot of this stuff happening in front of us in many different ways. But
Yeah.
I guess for folks that aren't as close from a business or technical perspective, it'd be good to understand, outside of the obvious things on why to innovate in the consumerization of technology. But outside of that, why do you feel that innovation is so important to the retail industry today?
God, sorry, that's also a good question. Well, I think innovation is important to every industry, and I think like when we talk about innovation, it's important to define the terms
Yep.
that we're using. So for me, this idea of innovation is really about an organization's ability to create sustainable new value. And I think in the reason why that is so important in the retail space is I think the retail is how we as individuals really interact with society. It's literally through the through the purchasing of product, the purchasing of experiences, if you will, within brands or organizations that we want to interact with. It really is sort of our interface into society, right? And
Right.
so, and I think it's one of the oldest. It's definitely one of the oldest forms of of social interaction, right? It's through trade. And so, with that, I think we have this insatiable appetite for new,
Right.
right? And for experiencing something that we do every day differently, right? And so I think the fact that we have this appetite to experience new things as human beings, and combined with the fact that retail or trade is sort of this historical way that we interact with society. I think these things come together, and we have this expectation that as we're out in the world, there's an expectation that we want to find the new thing, experience the new thing, tell stories about the new thing, right? And that can be a new product, it can be a new service, it can be a new experience, you name it. So I think there's some fundamentals around just how we interact with society that drive that. But then on the back end, I think consumer behavior is changing so quickly that retailers and CPG organizations have to think differently about how they're servicing um, customers. And I'm not going to talk about COVID because that's all we ever hear about right now. But that's been a huge accelerator in terms of how we expect to be interacting with a retailer or a CPG brand, and also how a CPG brand or retailer is expecting to be interacting with consumers. So I think you're seeing that kind of come together to create some really interesting new experiences and new ways of interacting with retailers in the world. I'm not sure if that's a bit of a long-winded sort of answer, I think,
That's
but
good.
I think those are the things that are really coming together.
And do you see any specific trends that are really driving these innovations? So this could be, we'll keep the health crisis off the table, but as far as any economic or social or behavioral trends that are really driving innovation today in retail.
Yeah, like so. I think the other thing that's just sitting back to the last question as a way to come into this one. I also think at the foundation of retail and retail experiences, there's a ton of convergence happening. So you think about manufacturing and supply chain. You think about health and retail. You think about a bunch of different industries are coming together and converging, I think, in
Yep.
really interesting ways, because I think the problems and the kinds of things that we're looking to solve into in our society right now are complicated, and I think require a lot of sort of collaboration. And so that's what I think is really driving a lot of innovation in this space, is this idea of collaboration and working with organizations or vendors that you wouldn't normally be working with, right, to
Right.
solve problems. I think it's becoming a very new normal for us, is seeing how how to collaborate more effectively, how to collaborate in very complicated environments that are data driven, and environments where you might be forced to collaborate with entities that you wouldn't normally want to be collaborating with, but you need to in order to solve the kinds of problems that we're looking to face. And I think in the retail CPG space, just talking about environmental issues, talking about health, so some of the opportunities around health, all of that depends on the ability for organizations to collaborate effectively and to collaborate in ways that allow them to still protect themselves and protect, a lot of the assets and data that they're managing. So I think that's a real big driver to collaboration right now, and absolutely a key focus area for the work that we're doing.
No, it makes sense. And I think on a side note, I think that you're absolutely right about the blurring of lines of industries, and how we categorize industries. In the past, I've used some Mike-isms. I've called them Franken industries. Essentially, the assembly of these, all these different pieces of different industries and coming together in new and meaningful ways. I think that trend's going to continue, and I think there is a fundamental challenge with how we think about industry today. Because again, we're creating these categories of things that we're regulating, that we're creating behavioral patterns around that don't really match the experiences and the drivers behind them necessarily. So, I would, instead of pivoting off of, are you in the auto industry? Are you in the high tech industry, the retail industry? Instead, saying, let's look at the capabilities that you're delivering and what sort of experience are you delivering with that capability. Let's categorize that. Let's not categorize the big umbrella corporation
Mm.
around what industry you're in, but rather the capabilities in which you deliver. And we can have much more, and better finite ways of regulating, creating solutions, and
Give me an example of that. I'm curious. Like,
yeah.
what's an example of just sort of reclassification of not industry, but I'm curious to know what
So
the.
take Amazon. Amazon's a retail company, and along with multiple other things, they're a fintech provider. They're a pharma company now.
Yeah.
With that, instead of regulating them or classifying them as Amazon as retail,
Mm.
you would break down those pieces and parts and say, for these particular capabilities, this is how we look at those capabilities.
Right.
And
Got it. Yeah.
and then you double click that even more and you go, okay, well, okay, they're interfacing with customers on a kind of a medical basis. Okay, great, you're kind of in that category, but what if it's just kind of a genealogy thing, right? Where it's not sharing your medical data, that needs to be HIPAA compliant, et cetera. So by doing that level of classification, you avoid a lot of the challenges that we have today around, if then else, compounded exponentially because everyone's in different businesses. Like as an example,
Well,
almost every
eh,
business on the planet is a bank. Everyone offers payments in some way, shape, or form, right?
exactly. No, I absolutely agree with you. Like, I think that's actually a really interesting insight. Is I think we create these sort of rigid classifications for industries, mostly for ourselves, right? But as again, like this idea of convergence, I think is really propagating, throughout our society right now. So I think to your point, like they're like a brand can hold multiple positions, right, in across different industries. Um, and I think the art and the science is to try to figure out, like, how to service those different parts of the business, knowing that though those intersection points aren't clean, right? So you look at
Yeah.
retail health, for example. You have a lot of retailers getting into health, right, and really trying to think about customers as patients or patients as customers, right?
Hmm.
And then you talk about retail organizations that have never had to think about regulation the way health requires them to think about regulation, and that offers some really interesting, complex problems that need to be solved into, right? And I think there's strategy issues within the organization, but there's also like issues around, as I said, like regulation and how governments are interacting with these types of brands and companies. So I think it's a really interesting distinction,
Yeah.
that those lines are being blurred, and that really things don't necessarily fit into nice industry silos anymore.
Yeah, and I'll have to put a link to this in the description and all that. There's actually a great MIT article that was released, I believe, a couple of years ago. Maybe it was HBR, one of the two, where they talk about, instead of using the term industry, use the term domain, and it wasn't quite as at the level of capability that I would like to see it at, because I look at this as, essentially I've got a bunch of Lego pieces out there and I can go and assemble what makes sense for, the customer segment that I want to go and target. But it's very, very similar concept of essentially breaking down some of these traditional constructs.
Yeah,
But
no, absolutely. Which actually, and the other point of that, right, is kind of going back to career and thinking about that. Like, it means you can no longer be a retail CPG expert, right? You have to understand manufacturing, you have to understand health, you have to understand like all of the convergent industries that are coming together to create value in a particular segment, right? So I think it's one of the
Right.
interesting things about Microsoft is like, although we sit in a retail CPG team right now, like the amount of conversations I'm having in health, the amount of conversations I'm having in manufacturing, it's like these are areas that I wouldn't normally had thought of myself as being, well versed in, but you're having to be well versed in order to solve the problems that are coming up.
So we've talked a lot about why to innovate, in the retail space. Are there, in your mind, examples where perhaps people are doing it wrong, or maybe innovating for innovation's sake, where there is no need for innovation? What are some of the challenges that you see for retail organizations in the innovation space?
It's that's interesting because there was a point in time where I kind of was thinking that for a lot of organizations, innovation isn't necessary, right? So you could make the case that there's some great apparel brands that just do really great apparel. So like what is the drive to to create sustainable new value when the value they're already creating is exceptional, right? And so there's a point in time where I was like, you know what, I actually don't know if every organization has to be innovative or innovate. Um, I think I'm changing my perspective there a little bit, in that I think it's a question of sort of ambition. I think every organization has to grow and develop and evolve and adapt. And I think as part of that process, there is the creation of value, right? And that's what keeps a brand relevant, over time.
Right.
And so, like, I would say that organization, like businesses that do a bad job of innovating or creating new value typically aren't necessarily around very long, right? Not now anyway. There can be sort of a long death to them, but I think generally speaking, that has increased as these organizations have become more technologically enabled, right? So if I think about brands that are doing a poor job, it's I still think I think like if we talk about domains within the context of retail CPG, like I think grocery, for example, I just don't. I think the way that we're thinking about grocery and interacting with grocery retailers is, there's value being created in pockets of that world, but I don't think there's like I don't think we're doing a lot of really interesting work there. And I feel like the work that tends to come up when we think about grocery and retail tends to be things like sensor enabling shelves, and which I think is all sort of interesting from a supply chain perspective and from a longer term strategy perspective, but doesn't necessarily shift the way that we're really interacting with retailers in that capacity, right? So I think there's a lot of work that can be done in that space. I know Amazon Go is kind of interesting, and we were talking about you know serviceless checkout, and that's all interesting stuff. But I don't think we've actually really brought to bear real strong value in the grocery retail space. When we start to think about supply chain differently, we start to think about production differently. We think about some of the things that have to happen relative to carbon labeling and that sort of thing. Like, these I think are going to force massive shifts in terms of how we interact with brands and products in groceries, for example. So that's an area that I think is ripe for really new thinking. But it's also very hard because those businesses are very margin constrained businesses, right? They don't have a lot of space to get things wrong, which I think which is why we're seeing, I think, that constraint a little bit.
Yeah.
You're going to say something, sorry.
No, it's good. And I think you are circling on, I think an important piece here. When we talk about folks that are doing it wrong, and, kind of the macro pattern that I see is folks that are doing innovation wrong is when they don't focus on the experience. How am I
Yeah,
going to make people's lives better?
sure. Yeah,
Fundamentally better. This could be
yeah,
the life of the employee, the back office worker, the end customer that's purchasing my products. It could be a lot of different people that are experiencing this solution. But oftentimes we want to take technology and we want to say, oh well, wouldn't it be cool if? But we don't answer the question, how do we create compelling experiences that delight our customers, that make them feel like they want to be part of our family and our ecosystem?
Yeah.
That oftentimes is a big, big miss. And I think in retail, especially, and if you take like the grocery store, I could care less about Amazon Go, to be very honest with you, because I don't want to go to the grocery store. I don't want to go. I just don't want to go. So I could care less if I don't have a checkout. I could care less because most likely, if I do go to the grocery store, someone's going to be bringing those bags and putting them in my trunk. Otherwise, I want them on my doorstep and I want it automatically ordered, and I want the experience of saying, hey, I want these types of meals this week. Figure out the ingredients. You know what I like. Figure them out, bring them to my doorstep, and make that
Totally.
stuff happen, right?
That's sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Does that make sense to you, Brian?
Oh yeah, totally. Like I think of it, if I think of the last 6 months, like what has really shifted in terms of my experience in a retail environment, and where have I walked away and kind of went, that's really really interesting, or that's really high value to me. The only one that really comes to mind is, we just, which is random even saying this, but we've just we've been subscribing to a food delivery service, like the prepared semi-prepared foods, where you kind of they come and everything's prepared. You just got to cook
like
it,
a Hello
right?
Fresh type of thing.
HelloFresh. Thank you. Yeah, it's called I think Good Food here is what we're doing. Like all sort of locally sourced and right, and
Yep.
then these things come to right. So not a revolutionary concept. And so we got into it over COVID because, like, at the end of the day, I do most of the cooking in the house, and I just was like, I was just falling into the routine of the same thing because it's easy, and I just, like, we're working and we're all living in the same house all the time. Anyway, so long story short, we get this food delivery service, and the experience was good. But then, what made it great was they started adding a bunch of interesting features, like same day delivery of groceries, right? So they have a whole grocery retail piece of their business, right? All of the innovations are on recipes, so you can get a box, and this box you can actually do 3 different recipes with the same ingredients, right? So you can kind of choose it. So, but for me, what was interesting was this idea of these food delivery services that are now becoming grocery services, right?
Yep.
And so, like, the likelihood of me now in my in my ordering process is already starting to happen, just adding on my eggs and my milk and some other programs and produce. um, it's gonna happen. And for me, I'm like, wow, it's such a subtle thing. Like, I wouldn't normally even be getting these services, but I've done it because of a multitude of different reasons. I think I'm a pretty good cook, but this has made my life a lot easier. And then now they're extending into parts of my life that I'm happy to give up. Like, there's
Yep.
no loyalty to me in my grocery store, right, or my
Yep.
convenience place that I go to. I will absolutely take that and give them that business because the experience has been so phenomenal. Like, that's a really good example, and it's not a brilliant piece of innovation. It's just literally just a nice adjacency that they're walking
Yeah.
into and taking advantage of, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the real value is. Fundamentally, it's very rare that we're like wowed. It's more like, wow, okay, this is helpful to me right now, and I'm paying a small enough premium that I'm going to do it. And that's where I think a lot of great innovation in retail happens. It's like slowly over time, removing the friction points, making it easier to click again, making it easier to just, like, right. That's where the value is.
So that's the second big one. Okay, so the second big aha here for folks to think about when thinking about either doing innovation right or wrong is around it's the technology makes the idea easier. It definitely helps grease the wheels. It gives you access, but it is not the innovation in and of itself. And I'll give you a couple great examples. We had just mentioned the example with HelloFresh. I subscribe to that, and I subscribe to ButcherBox. And I'm not giving any plugs or making any money or whatever. But what I really love about those companies is they know what I care about. They care that
Yeah.
I want responsibly grown, sustainable, meats and veggies and all that great stuff. I want no antibiotics, all that great stuff. Those are the things I care about, and I get it in a way that makes sense for my family. Now, another aspect here. Let's go extremely low tech. Let's go to the far end extreme. You've got the Gary V's of the world who's selling wine. And, he's got an e-commerce site, he's got social media, all that great stuff. What has he done now? And it's going like gangbusters. And I actually use this on occasion as well. Essentially, he's created a service. I forget exactly what it's like, wine text or something along those lines. But essentially, what he does every single day is those that subscribe will get an SMS message. And in that SMS message, it'll say, hey, we've got this wine with this, essentially a pitcher. And they say, this is what you would normally pay for it. Part of our club, you get half off. All you got to put into reply is a number. That number, if I say 5, or the magic number for them is 6, if you order 6, I get free shipping, and they'll automatically bill my credit card. It is brain dead, stupid. Anybody can do it. You just press the number, hit enter, you're done, walk away.
Yeah, and I think this is where I think you're absolutely right. This idea of sort of not being technology led, right? Being experience led. I think is it's sort of a it's a standard piece of innovation strategy now, right? Is just really understanding the experience dynamic and making sure you get that right and having the technology to service that. But I think to your point, like I think I think because most of the experiences that we have today that are interesting and novel and new are technology experiences. I think there's this propensity to believe that the right answer is a technology solution, when in fact, to your point, it can just simply be a solution that just removes friction in an elegant way, like the SMS example, the text message example that you just created. I think that's also hard from an innovation strategy perspective, because you're working with, like in my case, you're working with very, very very big brands, very senior people in those brands, and they're looking for that aha thing that's going to shape their legacy and impact the business in phenomenal ways. And oftentimes, the things that really matter are the small foundational things, right? So, we've talked at length about data collaboration, very very unsexy thing at face value, but the more you drill into enabling organizations to collaborate effectively together, the more you're able to elegantly infuse experiences differently, right? So, and that's really where my interests and passions are lying. And I think, a really stupid example, but one that I think is going to be so impactful is this area of carbon labeling in the retail space. You think about the impact that nutrition labeling had on consumer behavior. It's pretty. There's some stats on that, right? I think it's like when nutrition labels were introduced, I think like a consumer's the consumption of sort of fatty foods, or there was some sort of dynamic around 17% of consumers decided to choose differently based on the fact that nutrition labels were available. And I look at nutrition labels all the time in terms of decisions that I make around food and grocery. Now, bring that to carbon, I would absolutely think twice about probably purchases that I'm making based on my understanding of the impact that product has, on the environment. And a really stupid, lame example is Oatly milk, right? Mm-hmm. A Swedish company, they sort of defined the oat milk category in a lot of novel ways, but they were the first, I think, one of the first companies to actually put a carbon label on their product. And I was looking at the carbon labels as part of something I'm working on, and it's fascinating. Like they literally compare the carbon footprint of Oatly creamer to like milk, to dairy creamer, and I've stopped drinking cream. Like I'm just like, what, oat is absolutely fine, tastes relatively the same for how I like my coffee. And it's just like, and all I needed was that sort of sort of calibration of like, whoa, okay, this is actually quite impactful if I can do this at scale. And all of that is enabled by the ability to collaborate for that organization to bring in the carbon data from their entire supply chain, to put it into a nice label on a on a box of milk. That's where the innovation is going to happen. It's gonna come in and it's going to appear on a label of some sort, and you're gonna shift your behavior because of that, and the market will shift. And it's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's you're going to see it happen more and more over time. And so I'm passionate about putting the foundations in place to enable that kind of behavior change, because that's really where innovation happens, is when I've now shifted my behavior, whether that's ordering groceries through my my food service delivery, or whether it's changing my milk consumption because of a label that I've seen in passing, and I realize what went into putting that label on a box of oat milk, of all things.
No, I think
that was a big lengthy way to answer the question.
No, I think that's spot on. It's a great segue to more of what we want to talk about. And I think if this was kind of the last lesson to really kind of take away from what we're talking about here, is data is the fabric, right? That's stitching everything together. Data is providing the connection points with our customers. Data is providing customers context in which they can understand products and services that they want and don't want. Data is providing the ability for organizations to, in a more probabilistic way, help understand what customers may or may not want. Data is going to help us with our brittle and fragile supply chains. And so, creating this digital fabric, or, sometimes called digital ecosystems, allows us to be able to connect all that stuff together. Now, we talked about innovation not being technology driven or led. However, we know that technology is a vital part of all businesses. It's a key enabler for all of business, just like a highway system or telecommunications, utilities are all technology that we use as a foundational layer to our lives. And I think that, these digital ecosystems are going to be kind of that next layer in the information age, because artificial intelligence isn't very useful if you don't have great data. IoT isn't all that great if I don't care about the data that's coming out of it, or if it's bad data, right?
Yeah.
Blockchain is pretty much a non-starter if I don't have a data scientist working on it. And so I think that, when we look at this as a key enabling construct for us to rethink our business, I think that's where the technology innovation comes in, is being a source of inspiration. It's saying, oh, well, yesteryear, we had these constraints. We weren't able to have instant connectivity with our customers. We couldn't, essentially integrate with everybody's phone. Where's my demo device? Right here it is. Every one of these devices has an AR chipset already built on it. So you don't need to ship out, augmented reality glasses to anybody. Anybody can go up to the grocery store, hold this up to a QR code, or old school, whatever they're called, bar scan code, and have a heads-up display, augmented reality right there on my phone, and see, oh, well, there's the sustainability report right there. Here's the nutrition. Oh, I don't understand what this extremely long, complex word means that, I can't even pronounce. Click on it, and now I've got a oh, that's really sugar. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
great, fantastic. Yeah. And so, I guess for you, do you feel a similar way about kind of these digital ecosystems being one of the key drivers behind bringing innovation to, at least in this case, in retail?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like, there's a stat I think that you gave me in a conversation, which was like, I think $60 trillion market opportunity by 2025 in terms of digital ecosystems, and the value of digital ecosystems as they pertain, cross industry to just, directly applicable to, dollars being generated. So it's like the digital ecosystem conversation is here, and it is, I think, going to be one of the biggest drivers of change within not just retail but across industry. I think And I've been giving this a lot of thought, sort of about, what's needed, I think, to make that, to make that come to life and to really create sort of sustainable new value within those ecosystems. And I think one of the issues that we have is I think we treat data as a commodity, right? Like we everybody talks about data, and everything is generating data, right? And I think I really like your point about, quality of data is everything. And I think what we have to do to make, I think, the digital ecosystem economy really come to life is really understanding that data actually isn't a commodity. It's actually a very valuable resource
Right.
that needs to be treated, organized, respected and represented properly, or else, we spend endless cycles just trying to get to insights and information that is basically impossible to get to. So I absolutely believe that digital ecosystems are the future of a lot of innovation work that's going to be happening. I think we got to step away from just assuming that data is king, as a commodity, and really start to think about how we treat it as a valuable asset. And then to create the services and the infrastructure that allows us to actually really get to better decision making, because that's really all we're talking about in terms of data. How are we making better decisions, right? So being able to create a data collaborative where organizations that could be competitive but aren't in a particular instance, in order to share data to solve really interesting problems like environmental issues or supply chain issues, like that is where the real unlocks are going to happen. But we got to start by really understanding the value of the materials that we're generating by by the interactions that we're having in our lives. The data that we create is actually a very valuable resource.
And an analogy that I use whenever I talk about data in this particular context is, I talk about data as no different than from a chemistry perspective. If we think of, H2O water, and that is a fundamental, foundational building block to so many other things, to life itself. Just this one element. And if we thought of data in a similar way, and we said, look, H2O on its own isn't really all that exciting. But if we think about it being, assembled in these ways, now we've got something really, really compelling. But that predicates that the molecular structure of that H2O is sound. And we're not dealing with helium or, any other element on the periodic table, right? That we've got these stable core elements. And so, I think that is a key premise that we need to understand, because it's not just the data itself, it's what we do with the data. So, like, for example, if you look at Facebook, and Facebook's been getting a lot of heat lately about not necessarily the data they collect, but essentially the AI driven models that they create of you. So essentially they create a digital twin of you, and what they're able to do is they're able to model behaviors on what they think you will do, what you won't do, etc. So they don't necessarily sell the base data to a Target or a Amazon or whoever, but they'll sell the synthetic data that's created as a result of that. And again, building upon those compounds to create something new and useful. That's kind of where, at least, I see this going. I don't know. Is that something you're seeing in the retail space as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really good example. I mean, two things I really like what you said. Like I think water is a great analogy for data, because I think we, even better than fabric, right? Like I think because water we can so easily take for granted. But to your point, it's when treated as a precious natural resource, we tend to make good decisions around it, right? When it's treated as a commodity, we tend to make bad decisions around it. I think there's a psychological shift that's happening around water specifically. So I think it's a really good example. And I think removing sort of the efficacy of what Facebook is doing, I think it's a really good example of what happens when you treat information as as a valuable resource. And I think they've been able to do a lot of, look at, they've been able to shift industries based on their ability to understand consumer behavior and then obviously sell to that behavioral type. So that is absolutely driving how we think about retail today.
Well,
And
I'm
a
going
lot
to
of that
double down on what you're saying, Brian. And I'm going to say not only were they able to understand the behavior, but they were able to change the behavior around the globe on how people interact with technology, how people think about things like
yeah,
elections,
yeah.
with
Oh my
false
gosh.
information,
Yeah.
et cetera. So I think, that's the power behind this. And they not only got it, but they took it to the next level, which, kudos for them. And like you had mentioned, this isn't about the morals or ethics around the business model and some of the things that are going on. But as far as purely looking at this from a lesson on the power of data and what you can do with data, I think they are a phenomenal example.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think, so to answer your question, this is retail now. Retail now is being able to really understand your consumer, really be able to predict, where that individual is going to be going with their dollars, and then this is basically the first one in line, or position yourself as the first one in line to capture that value. So I think two things you said there that I think are interesting. One, I think the true indication of innovation, if we go back full circle, is this ability to shift behavior change. I think that's what fundamentally is a good measure of successful value creation. Has a behavior changed in a significant way, and has an experience shifted, because of that. I think that's a really good foundation for that. And I can't remember the second point. There was 2 points there. That was the one that I came out with. If you keep talking, I'll come up with the second one. But I think, as I said, I think it's a really good marker for for how we measure value is behavior change.
Yeah. So we're talking about, these digital ecosystems are able to affect, how we understand our customers. It allows us to adapt and provide compelling experiences for our customers. But also it provides either an intended or an unintended consequence of changing behavior. Wow, that was pretty cool, right? Hearing from Brian on all the cool stuff that he's doing, the insights that he sees out in the industry in the retail space is pretty amazing. And super grateful to have Brian on. He's a great guy, but also he's doing really cool stuff. And so in this part, we've gone through kind of the broad trends and, kind of the broader setup to the problem in retail. But in the part 2 of this series, we're going to dive deeper into the specifics around the digital ecosystem aspects and the data collaboration, which is going to be super important. So like with all of our other episodes, remember to go out on vnextpod.com. That's vnextpod.com. Remember the pod on the end. To go out there and check out all of our previous episodes and the resources that we've put out there available to you. But also, put a comment out there. Let me know what's resonating, what's not resonating with you. If you want to come on as a guest, we'd love to have you. Please submit your request through the website and would be happy to see if we can get you on. And so with that, we're going to continue our conversation with Brian Peterson next week, and I will see you then.